You're listening to the Middlemen podcast, this week with Tom Limongello and Todd Sawicki. Good afternoon, Todd.
Hello.
I'm excited again today. This is the first time we've ever had a guest on for the second time. We have Mark Williamson from Costco coming on, and he's been working on his new Velocity program. So Costco has a new LinkedIn newsletter, and he's been writing pretty much like every week. Here's what we're doing. Here's what we're rolling out. And I saw one in particular that really struck me, which was that he's going to be launching Google PLAs as part of the retail media network.
As an offsite option. Yep.
As an offsite option. So yeah, external search, not sponsored search on their site, but outside and, going higher in the intent world to try to get people onto their site, into Costco. So really makes sense to me. But even before we get into what we're going to be talking about, the fact that he was on for the second time, I started the episode saying, you're no longer the top episode on the Middlemen.
Which, by the way, I was like, that's a weird way to start with a guest. And I didn't quite understand where you were going with it or sort of the background there. I was like, man, you're a hard.
Well,
you actually had a very specific idea in mind.
Yeah, I had a very specific idea here, and I knew if there's any guest who could handle this, it would be Mark. But he he had his retailer hat on, and he went into this like it was a JBP or a joint business plan session, because he said immediately, okay, can I count both last episode and this episode together so that I could be number one again? And it basically sounded like, I was the retailer and he was the brand. And it's like, your sales are down. So what are we going to do this year to get them up? So yeah, that was a lot of fun.
Well, it was, and again, I'm not having been in a joint, business proposal or joint business plan meeting. I had no context, but the minute you explained that role playing, I'm like, oh, okay, I totally understand what you were doing. And you were going back to your JBP days.
I didn't plan it with him. It just happened.
No, my point is you didn't plan it. My point is that you knew what it was and you were playing that role, and it was, a flashback for you. But for me, I was like, I don't know where you two are going with this at all. But that's helpful context, right? That's how JBPs work is the retailer goes in and goes, okay, buddy, let's get those sales up.
So this is a great episode that talks about sort of where Costco is going. And I think we were just chatting about this. Costco doesn't, just launch retail media to make money. They do it when they think they're ready or they've tested it out. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on this?
I think, and we talk about this and Mark talks about this too, which is a lot of retailers early on would bend the knee to retail media, meaning they would chase every last dollar they could, do whatever it was imaginable to make a buck, regardless of how quote unquote appropriate it might be to that retail brand or experience or not. And I think as more retailers adopt retail media, they're, I think, doing more and more what Costco is doing, which is it's the other way around. Retail media has to bend the knee to Costco in the way they do their business. And I think that was true when Mark talked about, the different things he was trying to get done in retail media last year. We first talked to him, and then this year in the follow-up, it's the same thing where they have constraints on how they do business. And they will not violate them for the sake of just chasing an additional buck for the chase an additional buck. And I think there's a good lesson to other retailers as they build out RMNs or look to launch RMNs is you don't have to bend that knee. You can get retail media to conform to your brand and specialization. And I think actually that's good. Like it will ultimately, I think, help differentiate your RMN by having it be a little different and having it represent the personality and brand of the retailer is more than appropriate. And so therefore they're different flavors for different advertisers. And so I think that comes out and Costco is maintaining that. And I think, and Mark talks about that, it makes it an interesting challenge, intellectual challenge for him of how can he design new aspects of their program and yet maintain the core of what Costco is and their core identity and ultimately, customer experience.
Yep. And their relationship to their suppliers. Yeah. I mean, you mentioned, I didn't even pick this up in the episode that Costco doesn't do SEM on its products, right?
Or not its products. It doesn't do it for itself. It's never done SEM. Yeah. It's never acquired traffic.
Right.
It doesn't do that. And part of, Mark explains one of the impetuses for this program was it allowed them to get into the SEM game. Like their merchants were really into it, wanting to, how do we can play in Google? How do we get, but if vendors are funding it, it opens that door for them. And I
Yeah.
think so. It's an interesting win for Costco because it gets them in the SEM game, and vis-a-vis retail media and vis-a-vis their suppliers, their vendors, and that's a big deal in terms of the ability to buy traffic and be in places they wouldn't otherwise be. So it's an interesting dynamic of how it solves multiple strategic objectives for Costco by launching quote unquote retail media.
Yep. Well, we love talking to Mark, so let's let you listen. Welcome to the Middlemen podcast. We are here again. This is the first time we've had a guest on twice, and couldn't be a more exciting person to have. Mark Williamson, who does retail media at Costco. Welcome, Mark.
Hey, how's it going?
Really good. I have some good news and some bad news for you. Bad news first is you are no longer our top episode on the Middlemen podcast. The good news is you're back, so you can reclaim your title.
Do you aggregate listens between two episodes, or do I have to start from scratch?
That is a good question. Because we have not had anybody on, I will defer that answer. But we can figure out a way for you to become number one again.
I always appreciate the challenge.
Maybe we should say that you are now an author of a new LinkedIn newsletter, the Buck 50 newsletter, which I'm a proud subscriber of. And, it's funny, when we started out the year, I saw you at NRF, the StrataCash event, great event. And Kiri Masters talked about your tech stack and the fact that you opened the kimono, and that was great. But honestly, there was a lot in there that I wasn't sure about. There was a lot of new vendors. So it took me some time to process. But when I read your Buck 50 newsletter, installment 2, about Google product listing ads, I was like, something totally new. How did you get to running Google product listing ads?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something that we've wanted to do for a while, mostly because we see it as an opportunity. We get asked about it, I would say fairly regularly from advertising partners. And I think it's because our e-commerce business is so centered on what we call big and bulky. And so the items that we sell the most of that have high e-com penetration for us also happen to be items that are regularly searched. And so there is this kind of, I would say, this business imperative to say, to ask ourselves, are we showing up? Are the items, are supplier items showing up wherever people are searching? And I like the premise of this, not just this channel, but of everything that we're doing is like, we don't have the right to tell people how to search or how to shop or how to research or whatever it is they're doing. They're going to do what they're going to do. And it's our responsibility to be present wherever searches are happening. And it's changing in real time. It's going to continue to change. And so we really just challenge ourselves to say, where do we need to show up? And for PLA in particular, like the timing of this really doesn't have much to do with anything other than the fact that we were technically ready to do it. And so we've been doing a lot of stuff on our kind of foundational infrastructure. And that's really what I talked about at NRF is this idea of having a holistic retail media platform that is built on our first party data, that is aligned with our consent and preference and our identity management, so we can move into new channels, including upstream channels, to be able to take the capabilities that we have as a closed loop retail media offering into new spaces. And so we've had plans with Symbiosis for a long time. We've had plans for this channel for a long time. We were literally just waiting for the infrastructure to be ready for this channel to come to life.
So to back that up for the people who weren't in NRF, you're talking about sort of meta router, transcend, growth loop. Are all those part of this? Is that necessary to make this work?
Yeah, one of those, or actually two of those, incredibly important. So with transcend, in terms of like that's how we manage privacy compliance, and to making sure that any data that we're utilizing or capturing or warehousing, all of that is as compliant as it needs to be and hits our very, very high benchmark of maintaining and hopefully growing member trust through all of this. And so yeah, it transcends very much a component of this. And then MetaRouter is, for all intents and purposes, our data routing ecosystem, which because there's signals that we create, there's signals that other partner channels create, and MetaRouter is what facilitates the orchestration of the data flows between the whole ecosystem. And so, in order to capture the signals from offsite demand, we leverage MetaRouter to help figure out who that is, what they've done, and then feeds that information, those signals, back into our unified data platform, so we can do the closed loop measurement, so we can look at things like remarketing. So those two are very critical. Growth loop we're using as an audience builder today, and so it has less of an impact with this particular channel. But the signals that we capture from this channel, like those in-market high intent signals that feed into our unified data platform, then become usable within an audience. And so growth loop is not very, very far away from this channel at all.
Mark, offsite is something you did previous to the Google PLA function. So that's not the new news, is offsite. What is new is using Google as a channel. What's interesting is that when we think about offsite, I'm not sure any other retailers have used PLA as much, or Google Shopping as much, for offsite. So it's interesting to hear about that as another activation channel for offsite.
Yeah, you're right. We've been doing offsite programmatic for over a year now, and so that's really where we started that journey. And so the premise is basically the same: is that our members are consuming content, they're researching, they're doing things outside of our ecosystem, and so we have to figure out how to engage them in the right way. And so, to me, like, Google PLA is just another format.
Right.
And so it's not a display ad, it's not connected TV, but it's still a place that something is happening. It's lower down the funnel. It's definitely mid funnel. It's not necessarily, it's very different in purpose than a connected TV ad. But foundationally, we need to be able to do the same things, whether it's targeting, signal capture, measurement. All of those things have to be the same. And so for us, this is just an extension of that offsite pillar that solves a unique need or solves for a certain channel, but doesn't sacrifice any of the capabilities that we expect to have in the kind of open internet programmatic space. So Google as a walled garden functions differently. And so that's why it's very critical for us to get our ducks in a row, so we can then interface with them, so we can be interoperable with them in the way that we want things to happen, because our advertisers are demanding targeting, in-flight optimization based on real conversion signals, measurement, these sorts of things. And so, like, in some extent, we are going channel by channel, and the open internet's a little bit easier. Programmatic is a little bit easier. It's harder to nail down some of the walled gardens, but what we're finding is that with the right focus, we can get that part done. And so, yeah, we definitely want to cover the full funnel, top to bottom, but we don't want to make any sacrifices in any of the channels. So the promise of what Costco can do as a closed loop partner is true at all aspects, even if behind the scenes the wiring looks a little bit different, channel by channel, just by necessity.
You mentioned Symbiosis, which is the partner that's recently acquired by DoorDash, but that's powering this for you. What is it that they do specifically? Like, talk a little bit about how they're a vendor in between you and, say, Google, because what I'd heard of Symbiosis is that they're doing things like collaborative bidding, which sounds really interesting, but can you just sort of like give us a context there?
Yeah. So Symbiosis, like at a foundational level, we need a way to manage campaigns, to make buys from Google, and then to be able to optimize and measure and that sort of thing. And so, like, at its very core foundation, Symbiosis is being leveraged by us as a campaign management and measurement tool. So they serve that function very well. We have found them to be incredibly nimble, because we said this is what we're building. So we're building what we call the Costco Velocity ad tech stack. We have many partners. Anyone that we bring in to integrate into our stack, we need them working off of our first party data, and we need them working and being interoperable with all of our partner set. So that could be our identity layer, it could be our privacy and consent layer, it could be our audience building layer, whatever it is. And so any of our partners have to be agile enough and willing to play the role that we've asked them to play. And so Symbiosis has checked all those boxes and has been great partners in doing that. Their platform itself, and I think the original idea from them was like, what does does Google PLA or search ads look like in retail media? Because when I first started trying to do this at the other place 10 plus years ago, it gets really weird because you have an active digital marketing team that is buying keywords, driving kind of the core self-funded PLA strategy, because SEM is a big deal and affiliate is a big deal. And so what ends up happening is, you're, rather than partnering in the ecosystem, you're competing and you're driving up CPCs and not able to coordinate. And so I think the original premise of symbiosis was to be symbiotic in that relationship, where this idea of collaborative bidding, where 1+1 = 2.5, where you take a retailer that is spending on certain keywords and a brand that's spending on certain keywords, connect it into a retailer's product catalog to be more competitive in the space and to avoid an open market competition, which doesn't make sense for anybody at all. And so we definitely see that it's a little different with Costco. Like, we have no history of doing SEM. We don't do affiliate. We don't do paid media. And so this is a whole new ground for us. And so, like, what the thing that we're incredibly excited about is, for the first time, brands can buy against Costco items in the Costco catalog and drive conversion at Costco, which is going to drive up funnel exposure, site traffic, probably warehouse traffic, and then ultimately sales conversion. And so, like, we see a ton of headroom here, just because it's really been untapped for us as a retailer. And so the collaboration right now is using our data signals along with brand working media investments to drive demand. Whether or not we get into the collaborative bidding, we'll see. But one reason we like symbiosis is we know we have the option to do that.
Hey, so if you have listened to the podcast, you've probably heard me talk about offsite. I cringe when I hear people say offsite is new, such and such a retailer is launching offsite this year. Offsite has been around for many, many years, but it's never been a product that's given the retailers a lot of control. But in 2026, retailers are really starting to branch out and do new things like extended Google product listing ads. Retailers are working with LLMs. Commerce media networks have new approaches here that work with payment rails. So there's a lot of really interesting things happening. So that's why I've started to write Shopper Missions. It's my new Substack where I do deep dives in between the episodes.
One of the things that I'm curious about, and as we move into the Google PLA, is an interesting one, where a lot of retail media has been, how do I go up funnel, more upper funnel tactics, features, and Google Shopping, Google PLA ads are seen as more middle bottom funnel. What's your perspective on the landscape, last year versus this year? Are you still seeing as much of an emphasis on trying to go more top of funnel, less direct response in what you're seeing in terms of the retail media landscape? And what's your perspective on the feeling in the space of, should we be more top of funnel versus bottom of funnel as a segment?
I think the whole full funnel thing is evolving for. I think a big catalyst for this idea of even introducing upper funnel into retail media was because retailers wanted more and more ad revenue.
Yep.
And so, like, okay, we got to get to the bigger budgets. Well, the bigger budgets aren't buying down funnel, they're buying up funnel. And so, but it was always kind of an either or. Like, you're either selling yourself as a publisher and you're lower funnel, or you're working with brands and agencies and you're trying to get up funnel. And that's fine. Like, I still think that's an element of what's going on here, where you've got two different buckets with two different objectives, spending in isolation on certain things, and you hope they kind of connect, that you hope they meet in the middle. What has really changed over the last year is this idea of the connected funnel, and using retail media, whether it's retail media data or retail media ad solutions, for brands to connect their upper funnel campaigns with their lower funnel campaigns. And the example was given to me. So I had a really enlightening conversation with the CEO who helped me understand why this was important, and illustrated why it's so hard and why few retailers can actually pull this off, even if they have technically upper funnel solutions and lower funnel solutions. The idea is that brands are going to do what they're going to do. They have a story to tell. They have an upper funnel strategy. They're not going to change that just for a retailer. But by partnering with them on their upper funnel activities, it's not just about targeting the right members, but also understanding who has been exposed, and then taking what starts as a upper funnel, large, probably like a larger audience, understanding who's been exposed, and then nurturing that same cohort down the funnel as they continue to make different interactions with a retailer brand or with a brand. And the example that was given to me was if somebody sees a CTV ad for a particular item, maybe the goal is we want a frequency of we want 10 brand impressions with that person, with our video asset, either connected TV or online video or whatever it may be. And then that cohort has now been nurtured. So if that person shows up on my website, that brand now it'll impact their strategy of how to use our publishing solutions, because we can say that person we know saw your ad is now on my website. Do you want to change? Maybe it's your bidding strategy, or maybe it's your frequency strategy, or is there a sequential messaging pattern that you want to hit, where it starts as upper funnel, no co-branding, to middle funnel, it's still an upper funnel asset, but it's co-branded with a retailer, and then finally on a retailer website, it's heavily, it's obviously heavily geared toward that retailer, but it is conversion based. It is buy now. It's not learn more, and so that to me is what is really changing, within this connected full funnel strategy. And this, it's very hard to do because the signals have to connect all across the board, including channels that we control, where we're the publisher, and channels that we don't control, which is why we put an emphasis on making sure that every channel we support is connected into our platform, so we don't have signal loss, and so we can actually enable some of these capabilities that brands are asking for.
So yeah, keeping on the brand interest, and that's really exciting stuff, what you were just talking about. I was just on a panel with Jason O'Toole from Gildan Haynes, and he was talking about persona threading, which sounded very similar to what you were talking about there, which is, how do we get to sequential? How do we get to sort of actually using the data that's coming through all these touch points? Super interesting. I also heard from some other brands about, their reaction to Costco offering this new capability. And it was kind of like, does this remove the worries that I had about, how do I figure out if Costco is performing for me? So regional tests on the Costco specific SKUs, using Instacart data. Does this sort of, what are you hearing? I don't know, it's brand new, but what are you hearing from the brands about how this changes the relationship between you and the brands?
I don't think a lot in terms of changing. I think there's a lot of general interest in what this can do to drive growth. And if I go into like the psychology of a supplier is, you get into Costco and then you demonstrate the ability to drive sales velocity. And then that usually turns into good things. So either you go from a regional item or a test item into a national item, and then maybe you become an everyday item, or at least on some regular rotation. So that's really the psychology that we're trying to ladder into is if you're lucky enough to get your item into Costco, what can you turn on in support of that item to get the sales velocity up to whatever the benchmark is, $500 per warehouse per week, 5,000, whatever that metric of success is that they've agreed to with the merchant, that's going to turn on good things. That's really what we're going for. And so, like, it's not necessarily like this doesn't, I don't think change the approach to how suppliers are trying to work with Costco, but it gives them more tools in their tool bag on how to increase the probability that they will have success. Because like the model for Costco is people come to the warehouse, they walk around, they find this great new item, they try it because it's at Costco, and then they move on. And I think like if we're really trying to say is like, that's all good. It's the right item. A buyer has made a bet on it. They've taken precious floor space to put this item in the warehouse and they hope that it sells. Can we help spark that demand? Can we spark the awareness? And that's where, whether it's upper funnel or middle funnel, can we pre-create demand? So it's not only the warehouse discovery where you accidentally bump into an item you never knew existed. Can we seed the market a little bit? And it's like, yes, we're talking about Google PLA today, but like there's other ways of discovery. Increasingly, the LLMs are becoming part of that process. And we see that as an extension of this exact same concept. Social media is the same type of thing. And so we see that as an extension of this as well. And so like our like the conversations we have with suppliers is how can you gin up demand in addition to the already massive demand flywheel that Costco creates just by existing and putting items in the warehouse. Because that works really, really well. But can we grow a point or 5 points on the margin? Can we get the sales per warehouse per week up to that benchmark a week faster or 2 weeks faster by preceding the market a bit with some of this upper funnel demand?
So now we know why you call it Costco Velocity.
There's many iterations of the naming convention, but we are trying like this idea of sales velocity it's Costco. It's the speed of sales that really makes this flywheel work. It's that efficiency that's baked into the business. We're trying to take that exact same concept into the advertising space.
Mark, one interesting takeaway from the conversation and even naming it Costco Velocity is it's clearly a offering intended for endemic, right? Endemic suppliers, vendors to Costco, whereas a lot of retail has been about whether it's top of funnel and non-endemic. And to an extent, one of the dynamics of retail media versus traditional publishing is more limited inventory. Like we hear about retail media getting sold out, especially in-store is a great example. In-store retail media, we hear lots of stories of how that sells out very quickly. Does that lean into the focus of Costco and retail media being more endemically focused than what others have thought about for retail media? And, do you think that if that's the case, is that, a purposeful focus and where you'll be versus some of the other RMNs out there?
Just the premise of the question is the idea of focusing on endemic about working within the scarcity that we have in terms of available placements?
That's part of it. And does that endemic focus become something that is sort of more core to Costco as a result versus other RMNs, which might be a little bit more non-endemic focused in comparison?
Our emphasis on endemic advertisers is the strict adherence to the belief that people join Costco and then they renew their membership because of the items that we sell. And the more disciplined we are to that truth, the more likely we are to have retail media be a driver, not just of product sales, but of membership as well. And so we don't want to deviate too far from the stories of the items that we sell. And there's several other reasons why non-endemic is somewhat problematic for us, because there's not very many verticals that we don't compete in.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you guys have the travel and the hearing aids, so who else is left? So.
We have a very, very small list of non-endemics that we would like to be our first partners in this space. But in reality, though, we compete in so many different areas of the market that it becomes hard to identify a non-compete, non-endemic, which is a bit of an issue. But it's something we haven't necessarily given up on trying to find what that right mode is. But it all comes down to demonstrating member value, and non-endemic just makes that very hard. And so far, it has not elevated high enough to cross our hurdle to say, yeah, this is worth it. Even though there's definitely a lot of interest in partnering with Costco, whether it's within our own supply or with audiences or whatever it may be, we have not yet figured out the right member-centric reason for why we would do non-endemic.
So I wanted to go back to some of the shopper experience stuff that you were talking about before. You were talking about seeding the market. I think that's interesting. But just for Costco shoppers, you guys don't really have like a persistent cart. It's more like, maybe I have a list, maybe I don't. Maybe I'm just going on a trip, and I have some things in the back of my mind. Like when you have that single SKU upstream, one, I guess, are you looking for e-commerce growth right away? Or is it more just sort of getting people to have better lists when they get in there?
The answer may depend on who the stakeholder is. As an advertiser, this is positioned as a performance product. We call it performance shopping ads, and so it's a CPC base, and so the idea is that this drives sales velocity quickly. That because this is lower funnel, you're speaking to in-market, high-intent audiences that should drive conversion. The way we've set up this channel is to be able to attribute to both an online and a warehouse sale. And so like we're indifferent to where that sale actually happens, but our belief is that this is going to drive e-commerce traffic and sales primarily. we may surprise ourselves. We may find out that people that are researching mattresses or refrigerators or televisions are doing their research on a search engine and then ultimately buying in the warehouse. But time will tell what actually happens there.
Well, I mean,
But this,
yeah, the velocity thing I think is a great name because there's this worry initially where it's kind of like, oh, if I find the SKU online and it's at Costco, I could get it delivered, then I don't go on a trip and isn't, but I've also heard, and I think when we were at NRF, I heard this as well, is like, I didn't really get the idea that retailers sometimes don't like ads because it slows people down in the store. And so velocity overall is a much bigger concept for a retailer than it is for media people like us.
yeah, and I think the idea of like this single item, like this is something I learned when I got here, is that Costco is item merchants. It's part of that SKU discipline of like, they're not category managers. They have a very select budgeted number of SKUs that they manage, which allows them to go incredibly deep on every component of that item, price and quality and service levels and all the different elements of that. And so, like, I don't think it's necessary. I actually think it's on brand to be item centric in the things that we're doing. And so we just have to believe that an item can drive a trip, which then expands into more items, of course. And so the item drives the shopping occasion drives the basket. And so if I look at our e-com business, for kind of the big and bulky area, there are a lot of one and done types of transactions. Like, I am buying a fridge, you buy a fridge. I'm buying a mattress, I buy a mattress. So the e-com shopping behavior is a little bit different, particularly in non-food, non-consumables. And most of the campaigns we think we're going to be running through this channel are going to be on items. And so the thing for us though is that if all it takes is one set of tires or one mattress to justify the cost of membership. And so if we are helping members, if we're reinforcing the value of membership by helping a member discover and save on an item that they need very much, that's a big ticket item, the likelihood that they are going to renew their membership is very high. And if they renew their membership, then they're shopping. And then you get the impulse buy, you get the warehouse shop where the basket gets fuller and fuller. And so like we have to, like, even if this is an item marketing channel and it ends up being a item transaction, that's okay, because that feeds the beast, that drives the rest of the behavior, which I think is about bigger and bigger baskets, more and more trips over time.
One of the interesting comments, Mark, is listening to Costco and still maintaining its discipline around what it thinks about the purpose of retail media is and not chasing the shiny objects. And even using something like PLA, when we originally talked, you talked about the challenges of selling in different RMN concepts in Costco and the leadership there. What was their reaction to selling in Google? Or was there any concern about Google as this sort of, again, walled garden, black box sort of beast? And as a follow-up to that, as you think about other initiatives across the landscape of RMNs, what are some of the areas that you're interested in pursuing or researching going forward?
The sell-in process is always challenging, and it depends on who we're talking to. So legal has a reaction, and IT has a reaction, and merchandising has a reaction. This is actually a channel we were pretty excited for because merchants fundamentally know that SEM is a thing that's happening. So if you search for refrigerator on Google today, you're going to get a lot of products from a lot of our competitors, and you're not going to see any Costco there. And so that means, like, we are absent at the point of decision and possibly the point of purchase. Yeah. And we never even had a shot. The problem is that as an organization that does not invest in marketing, like, there's just this gap. And so I think our merchants fundamentally know that this is a way of driving traffic and sales. So they're actually excited about the opportunity. There's always that apprehension around, like, well, what else could we be spending money on? And is this money going to come back to us in cost and all that kind of stuff? So we have to have kind of our safeguards in place for how we make sure that these are incremental investments made by performance marketers who this is something that they regularly buy, rather than having this be funded by trade. And so but in general though, the way that we have pitched this, this is an offsite channel where the bulk majority of the investment goes toward working media, so we can reach as many people as possible and sell as much stuff as possible. Like, this is not a retail media margin maker. And so we've really just focused this channel on driving awareness, traffic, and sales. And I think, and that's true of everything that we're pursuing, is that the benchmark of success is this driving relevance for members? Is it driving sales conversion? Something more than just ad revenue. And what that ends up doing is it makes it, I think, more complicated to get some of these solutions out the door, because if we can't target it and we can't measure it, then we can't go back to the organization and say, hey, we did something good. We did a thing that you're interested in. And so like we continue to, I think, make inroads within the organization, because that centricity on member relevance and top line sales is something that we can all agree on. And how we do it, how fast we do it, what the investments are required, what the resources are required, that's all up for debate. But increasingly, though, we feel like the tide has turned a little bit. The conversations are shifting more into, I see the value of this as a way of growing my business. And as we look forward, though, I think we're going to continue to move upstream with this. We're innovating on our existing offsite solutions. We're trying to crack a few more walled gardens, which again is very hard, because you have to have exposure files, you have to have certain data terms, and there's just like these are big rocks that we're working to move. But we remain committed to making sure that the addressable aspects of the Costco Velocity stack can reach as many of our members as possible on the open internet and in walled gardens as well. So a lot more to happen within our offsite pillar. We have an awful lot of innovation coming in our onsite pillar for the rest of the spring into the summer, leading into holiday. So we're innovating across the stack and making sure that we are interconnected between the offsite signals and the onsite signals. So a lot more to come for sure. You just have to say subscribe to the newsletter, because that's where we'll make news first.
Yeah, no, and I think you're setting yourself up to have a third and fourth appearance on the pod. So I love it. Wanted to close with a new type of question. I shared this out on LinkedIn, so maybe you saw it, but what's the boldest either retail media or trade experiment in your vast experience in being in retail have you ever run? And to give you time to think, because this was at the end of the questionnaire. Examples would be like Sam Walton in Made in America talks about how he brought in Zori sandals for 19 cents, cool price, threw them on a table, and they went like hotcakes. Dollar General started with pink corduroys, sold them for $8, and then the whole town was like an ad. Five Below sends deflated basketballs when they ship because they want to be able to ship more. So like cool stuff like that. Do you have something in your career that is similar where you had a lot of fun testing something out?
Yeah. So since I saw that question, I've been trying to come up with something that would be interesting. And I don't know, maybe I'm not as bold as other people, or they just seem a little bit too I don't know, too boring. But like, and this is completely honest, this is probably a little too self-serving and a little too on the nose, but like I think this idea of bringing the best of retail media to Costco, it is like right now, I guess the boldest thing happening from me and my team, and this decision to meet the demand for transparency by being transparent, not just about like data and making data available in dashboards or whatever, and performance transparency, which I think generally is what's being asked for, but also like foundational transparency, like how the sausage is actually made, and like which
is bold. No other retailers like talking to that level of detail, either because they're not sure they can or they don't think they're allowed to, right? I mean,
when I think that like Costco has a code of ethics, and one of them is respect for our suppliers, and like as I've kind of been ingratiating myself within the culture and today, like what does that look like in the retail media space? Because the relationship is entirely flipped. We're on the selling side, not the buying side.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we're still representing the retailer, so there's still kind of this weird dynamic in the relationship. And so kind of like what does respect for the supplier look like when I'm actually the supplier, not the buyer? And this is really what came to the forefront was, let's just be wildly transparent about what we're doing, what we can do, what we can't do. And this idea of not waiting for perfection before we go out. And this makes my team a little bit nervous as we're going through this, because we're not at Fulbright on every channel. Like even with what we're doing here with Google, like we could have waited and we could launch the Symbiosis platform within Costco Velocity until we have Google and Bing and the social channels and everything else. Like I said, no, let's get an MVP out there that is as connected as it needs to be, is as good as it needs to be, and let's go build on that, and let's invite people in to be partners with us. And what'll happen is they'll get their fingers dirty as they are working with us. They're going to have opinions, and they'll tell us where all of our scars are at. And it may be great, it may suck, but we'll deal with it. And so, I think that's the objective of what we're trying to do, is to show respect by being blatantly transparent about what we're working on and why. And it won't be for everybody, and we'll see. Hopefully, more often than not. But like the Costco ethos is bold by nature. I was trying to think of a Costco merchandising experiment that I could bring forward. The whole company is an experiment.
Right.
Like unless it's like paper towels, almost every item is an experiment. And if it works, we do more of it. If it doesn't, we get out of it really quickly. And so,
you did
like,
experiment with the name Premium Towel, which is kind of a joke around my house, but
I no comments on that. but I think like the idea is like at the very, very beginning of this experiment, what I said was we're going to do a retail media program that reflects the Costco brand. And so this is just what came out of it. I don't know if it was the design or not, but the whole thing is an experiment, and if it works, we'll keep doing more of it. If it doesn't work, we'll stop. And this whole, the PLA thing may not work, we'll pivot, or it may not be good enough, and so we'll pivot. And that's, that's about as bold as I can get. I'm fairly risk averse.
we're here for it. This is great.
Yeah.
Todd, any parting questions?
Nope, I'm good. It's always interesting to hear the story of Costco. And I do appreciate the organizational discipline around the RMN, and what they allow you to do and not do is very much in the Costco way. So it's a very interesting story where a lot of times RMNs are about chasing margin and dollars, and you start seeing crazy things happen. Interesting in their own right, but it's a very different model at Costco, and it's been interesting to watch the journey and its growth.
I'm glad for the feedback, and it is a wild journey. And I was had a one-on-one with my boss a few weeks ago, and I think I was complaining about something like lack of resources, or just kind of like just challenges we were having getting a few projects across the finish line, and part of me is just like, wouldn't it be easier if we just did away with all these constraints? Like, because we have the power to. We're not talking about technical limitations or regulatory limitations. We're talking about our own policies that are holding us back. And then as I'm talking out loud, and he's either giving me a blank stare, or I can see his brow starting to furrow, I go, but because we're forced to do it this way, it means that we have to be really sharp. We have to be incredibly creative, which I like some days is really irritating to me. But other days I'm still grateful for it, because if not, I think we would take the path of least resistance. And I don't know if we would like where that leads. And so it requires us to be as disciplined as the rest of the organization, but also I think it's unlocking creativity that otherwise would not have happened.
Well, thank you for bringing the Middlemen along on that journey. Very exciting stuff. Really, we love
Thanks
this.
for having me.
All right. We'll see you next time.
All righty. Take care.